It was just after sunset when the familiar chaos of the small mobile home began to fade. 6 children, usually a whirlwind of voices and clattering toys, were scattered across the living room and kitchen. But tonight, an unusual stillness hung in the air, heavy, unsettling, like the house itself was holding its breath. No one inside knew that in just a few minutes, 3 lives would end forever. A cartoon flickered on the TV, oblivious to the darkness creeping closer. Outside, neighbors went about their evening as usual, cars passing, dogs barking, but inside, something dangerous had been building silently, waiting. Then it happened. One gunshot shattered the calm. Screams followed. Another shot. And another. In seconds, the house fell into a silence so heavy, so final, it felt as if time itself had stopped. At the center of that horror stood Robert Seth Denton, 19, quiet and unreadable, whose blank stare hid a heart capable of unimaginable destruction. That night, under the pale glow of a buzzing yard light, and in front of his terrified siblings, he took the lives of his mother, his stepfather, and his grandmother. The home that had been filled with noise and chaos moments before was now a crime scene, waiting for sirens. Before we continue, welcome back to our YouTube channel. If you love gripping true crime stories that pull you in and won't let go, you're in the right place. Today's story is intense, heartbreaking, and unforgettable, so stay with me. In that small Virginia home, his mother, his stepfather, and his grandmother lived together with the children as one crowded, complicated family, doing their best to hold life together in a place where survival often depended on effort more than luck. Their world was rural, quiet, and deeply shaped by the culture around them. Hunting wasn't a hobby, it was part of everyday life. Hearing a gunshot in the distance was as normal as hearing a car door slam. No one blinked at the sound, it blended into the rhythm of the community. His mother pushed through each day with a tired kind of strength, managing money that never stretched far enough, and children who needed more than she ever had time to give. His stepfather tried to bring order into the chaos, believing strongly in rules, routines, and a firm hand to keep the house steady. His grandmother added the softness the home rarely had time for, the quiet patience of someone who had lived long enough to understand that even difficult families deserve love. And then, in one violent burst of sound and shock, that family came undone, while the youngest eyes in the room watched everything fall apart. The memory burned into them instantly, becoming a weight they would carry for the rest of their lives. Seth wasn't the kind of boy who grew up under harsh whispers or loud trouble. On the surface, he looked like a quiet young man. Not violent, not wild, not someone neighbors ever flagged for fights or rage. He moved in the world like a shadow that drew no attention, blending into streets and doorways, never doing more than going where he needed to go. What police records later revealed hinted at shadows behind closed doors. On the night of August 29, 2015, he was dressed in camouflage, armed with a high-powered rifle, reportedly carrying about 100 rounds of ammunition, when he burst into his family's trailer in eastern Tennessee and opened fire on his mother, his stepfather, and his grandmother, while 6 children watched. They say he had hated his mother for most of his life. Investigators noted that over the years, Denton made statements about wanting to kill her. In the minds of neighbors and relatives, this was a boy they thought they knew, but they didn't know the weight he carried. He had once served briefly in the army, with no serious criminal record before that night. Some family members later recalled that he often seemed distant, sometimes cold. He wasn't warm or demonstrative, but he wasn't openly hostile either. On ordinary days, he seemed more withdrawn than angry. Maybe it was the quiet that let the anger grow unnoticed. Maybe it was the silence that allowed resentment to gather weight inside him. However it happened, by that night, something inside him cracked. And when he finally snapped, that darkness spread like wildfire. On the evening of August 29, 2015, he slipped in through the back door as the family moved through the rooms, children playing, adults doing what adults always do to keep a noisy house functioning, and in a matter of moments, the household's everyday sounds were replaced by the sharp, unnatural percussion of gunfire. Eyewitness accounts gathered by police and recounted at trial described a scene that unfolded with a devastating, almost mechanical clarity. The shooter fired into the living space while 6 children looked on, and 3 family members, his mother, his stepfather, and his grandmother, collapsed where they stood. One of the children sustained a fragment wound and required medical attention. Several others would later tell investigators how they watched the violence happen, how the faces of the people they loved changed in seconds into something they could no longer recognize. After the shootings, the sequence of moments that followed underlined the surreal nature of what had just occurred. Denton walked outside and, according to authorities, told his grandfather where to call for help. The grandfather returned fire once during the chaotic aftermath and wounded Denton in the arm. Denton then called 911 himself, received medical treatment for his injury, and was taken into custody, an almost clinical end to an act of raw human ruin. From investigators' early interviews to the testimony presented at trial, certain facts emerged that framed how the case was prosecuted. Denton arrived armed and prepared. The killings occurred in the presence of multiple children, and the crime left a community searching for explanations that simply were not forthcoming. It happened fast, so fast, the adults inside the home never had the chance to register fear before the bullets found them. Later, one of the children would say it felt as if Seth transformed in front of them, as though something inside him stepped forward and took over his body. Seth lifted the rifle with a chilling calm, a calm that did not match the horror about to unfold. The first shot cracked through the air with a violence that shook the room. His stepfather dropped instantly, collapsing before a single shout could escape his throat. The second shot tore into the silence, striking his mother. She fell with her eyes wide, stunned by a terror she had no time to understand. The third shot ended his grandmother's life, her body folding in a heartbreaking, fragile way that the children would remember forever. Chaos erupted around them. The children screamed until their voices fractured. Some ran for corners or hallways, their legs trembling beneath them. Some froze exactly where they stood, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to believe what they were seeing. A few could only stare, wide-eyed and helpless, as their childhood ended right there on the living room floor. To them, Seth was no longer Seth. He was a nightmare carved into a person they once loved. Inside, the air grew thick with gunpowder and the metallic scent of blood. The home that once held the noise of children and everyday arguments was swallowed by a silence that felt unnaturally heavy, almost suffocating. Outside, the shots echoed across the neighborhood. Neighbors later said the sound made them stop mid-step. It felt close, too close. Some stepped outside, scanning the tree line. Others stayed frozen inside their homes, uneasy without knowing what their instincts were trying to warn them about. They didn't yet know those consecutive shots were tearing a family apart. And then the house fell quiet again. A quiet that did not belong to evening or routine, but to death. After the final echo faded, Seth walked outside with the same eerie calm he had shown moments earlier. No panic, no visible regret, just a heavy stillness wrapped around him like a second skin. He picked up his phone, dialed 911, and spoke with a voice drained of life. "I need to report something," he said. It was the sound of a young man calling the police on the destruction he had just caused, a voice so flat, so empty, that the dispatcher later said it barely sounded human. Police cars rolled into the neighborhood one after another, their flashing lights washing over front porches and gravel driveways. The quiet street, usually peaceful at night, suddenly felt charged like the air itself understood something had gone terribly wrong. When officers stepped into the Denton home, they were met with a sight that made even trained professionals hesitate. 3 bodies, 6 children, trembling, crying, or staring in disbelief. Blood soaking the carpet, streaking walls, clinging to the air like a heavy fog. One deputy later said he had never walked into anything so heartbreaking. Another said the stillness in the room, the kind that only comes after pure panic, was almost unbearable. Outside, neighbors gathered in small groups, gripping their arms, shaking their heads, trying to process a nightmare unfolding on a street where the loudest sound was usually a hunting rifle echoing across the fields. And then came the arrest. Seth didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't fight. He was found outside the home, standing in the yard with a strange, empty calm spread across his face. The same boy neighbors described as quiet, polite, almost forgettable, stood waiting like someone who had already stepped out of his own life. Officers approached slowly at first, hands on their weapons, uncertain what version of Seth they were walking toward, the silent teenager they thought they knew, or the person who had just shattered his entire family. When they called his name, he turned his head as if waking from a fog. He didn't cry, he didn't ask questions, he simply raised his hands and let the cuffs lock around his wrists, his expression flat, his eyes distant. To the officers, it felt surreal. To the neighbors watching from the edges of their yards, it felt impossible. How could the quiet boy down the road, the boy nobody ever suspected, the boy who never made noise, be at the center of something so unthinkably violent? People asked the question again and again, searching for something that made sense. But no answers came. Not that night. Not in the days that followed. Not in the months that stretched out afterward. The horror had happened, and all anyone could do was try to understand a story that refused to fit into the world they thought they knew. Detectives combed through evidence and witness statements, trying to unearth anything that could explain why Robert Seth Denton turned his rifle on his own family. They asked the obvious questions. Was it money troubles? Tensions over shared space? Fights nobody outside heard about? But as they dug, the picture grew foggy rather than clearer. Nothing stood out. No financial records indicated desperate debt. No neighbors came forward describing ongoing abuse or major fights. His criminal record had been clean. There was no prior violent arrest, no public warning signs. Then, in a twist that shocked the courtroom, the defense team argued that the real killer might have been his grandfather, and that perhaps the grandfather had done the shooting. Was it a desperate ploy born of denial, or a possibility worth considering? The prosecution immediately pushed back, and investigators re-examined every angle with renewed intensity. Fact by fact, room by room, statement by statement. They retraced the shooter's steps, rechecked the trajectory of bullets, and re-evaluated who was where when the shots rang out. But through it all, one consistent thread persisted, and slowly, painfully, it became the backbone of the case against him: the children's testimony. All 6, young, terrified, ordinary kids told law enforcement and later jurors that it was him. They saw him aim the gun. They heard the shots. They watched their mother, grandmother, stepfather fall. Their voices, at first shaking, then trembling, then almost broken, they became the truth the investigators couldn't ignore. In their recollections, there was no doubt, no hesitation, no shifting blame. It was always, he did it. In that small, messy living room, with children's toys scattered and dinner dishes piled by the sink, the crime had been committed. And though motives remained elusive shadows in a past, none outside fully understood the memory of what those children saw became the foundation on which justice stood. After all the evidence had pointed to Seth as the real killer, the case moved into its final and most emotional chapter: the trial. When Seth finally walked into the Washington County courtroom, years after the murders, people expected to see some trace of emotion on his face: regret, rage, fear, even confusion, anything that would suggest a human being wrestling with what had happened. Instead, he carried the same blank, hollow stare he had the night officers found him standing outside the trailer. Reporters later noted that he barely reacted to anything testimony, photographs, or even the accusations read aloud in front of him. He sat stiffly, almost detached, as though the trial was happening to someone else. The prosecution portrayed him as calm, deliberate, and fully aware of what he was doing that night. They emphasized the number of shots fired, the close range, the fact that each victim had been directly targeted, and the chilling detail that Seth had enough extra ammunition on him to keep shooting if he wanted to. They argued that this was not an accident, not a moment of panic. This was intention. The defense, backed into a corner, tried every angle they could. They floated alternative explanations, including the controversial claim that Seth's grandfather might have been responsible. They questioned the reliability of memories, the chaos of the scene, and whether investigators might have missed something in their rush to judgment. But witness after witness walked to the stand, each adding another piece to the puzzle. Detectives described the scene with a heaviness that never left their voices. Neighbors recalled hearing the rapid, unnatural pattern of gunshots that night. Forensic experts explained the bullet paths, the distance, the direction, each detail pointing back to Seth. Family members, shaken and exhausted, tried to make sense of the boy they thought they knew. Yet nothing in that courtroom hit harder than the children's testimonies. They were not asked to take the stand in person. Some were too young. All were too traumatized, so the court relied on recorded statements and interviews. The moment the audio played, the entire room shifted. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters stopped writing. Even the judge's expression tightened. Hearing the small, trembling voices of children recount the night their brother destroyed, their world broke the courtroom in a way no piece of evidence ever could. Their words were simple, scared, and painfully direct. They described what they saw, what they heard, how Seth looked, how he moved, how the gun sounded. And not once, not in any recording or written statement, did they blame anyone else. When the jury returned, there was no suspense, no uncertainty hanging in the air. They walked in with a kind of heavy finality that told everyone the decision had already settled deep inside them. Guilty. On all 3 counts of first-degree murder. Seth showed no reaction as the verdict was read. No flinch, no tears, no visible change. Just that same vacant stare. A stare that left the courtroom wondering not only why he pulled the trigger, but who he had become long before the shots were fired. After the verdict, the courtroom felt heavy, as though it had taken a deep breath that no one knew how to release. The judge rose, his robes brushing softly against the floor, and his voice held both calm and sorrow as he spoke for the victims, for the children, for justice. He described the cruelty of what had happened, how the crime shattered lives and innocence in one brutal, unthinkable moment. He spoke of the victims, a mother, a stepfather, a grandmother, all gone, and of 6 children whose world was irrevocably broken by what they witnessed. The judge's words trembled slightly when he acknowledged the trauma those children would carry forever. The weight that no child should ever have to bear. Even as he pronounced the sentence, life behind bars, no chance of parole, the room seemed to shift.
Robert Seth Denton, guilty of first-degree murder.
Some in the gallery gasped quietly. Others bowed their heads, and among the survivors, grief mixed with numbness, as though part of them wondered, does this even matter now? Seth listened without reaction. No tears, no shame, no regret. His face was calm, empty, as if the room, the words, the verdict itself, belonged to someone else entirely. He sat, silent and still, like a ghost trapped in flesh. The sound of the judge's gavel felt distant, an echo that belonged more to legal procedure than to the pain echoing in every heart present. To many, the sentence was justice, a necessary end, the only possible verdict. But in the hush of that courtroom, some could not help but wonder if any number of years, even a lifetime, could truly balance the loss. For a few, life without parole meant closure. For others, it felt incomplete, hollow. Because no matter what the law decreed, the real damage had been done. Lives altered forever, childhood stolen, a family erased in the space of minutes. And for the quiet children left behind, no prison sentence could bring back what was lost. And so the sentence was delivered, final, irrevocable, but the grief, the pain, the haunted silence, those remained. The children were separated. Some were sent to relatives, clinging to familiar faces for comfort that could never fully erase what they had seen. Others were placed in foster homes, their routines and surroundings rewritten in an instant, leaving them to navigate a world made strange and frightening by trauma they never asked for and never deserved. The community mourned in silence, their shock turning into quiet questions that lingered in every conversation. How could a boy who grew up under the same roof, who shared the same meals, who laughed and played in the same rooms, become capable of annihilating half his own family in minutes? No one knows. Perhaps no one ever will. The shadows of this tragedy will never fade, and the questions it leaves behind haunt us still. If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories, dive deeper into the mysteries, and hear the stories they don't tell in the headlines, subscribe to my YouTube channel and join the journey into the darkness.